60% of the national total. Its chief economist David Norman says the city's job losses averaged 200 a day, fewer than forecast during level 3, but still high.
These are real people with lives and families to support, and a lot of them lost their jobs, over 4,000. But I think what we've been encouraged to see through Wave 2, much like we saw in Wave 1, was that there has been remarkable resilience in the economy.
David Norman says the second lockdown cost the city $40 million a day. The Porirua City Council has to pay back $2.6 million it received in COVID-19 wage subsidy. Its initial application was approved when it reported a revenue loss of 44% in April, but this didn't include rates revenue. The Ministry for Social Development later clarified the criteria to include rates, and today it told the council its application no longer met the threshold. Mayor Anita Baker says the council will have to borrow the money it must pay back, which will limit funding for future projects. But there won't be staff cuts or rate rises as a result. She says the application was made in good faith. A mortgage rate war could be on the way as banks look to lend more money to potential home buyers. Heartland Bank has already announced an historical low one-year fixed loan rate of 1.99%. Its announcement is likely to be followed by others, according to banking commentator Claire Matthews.
I think there's every likelihood that there's going to be a bit of an interest rate war. This tends to be the time of year when the lenders have interest rate wars. We haven't had them seriously the last couple of years.
Claire Matthews, rates are expected to fall further when the Reserve Bank updates its monetary policy next month. A woman says she was ready to give up on life when she was abducted in Wellington and had one of her fingers cut off after being chained up and beaten. Samuel Gray and Pamela Kalipo are on trial after pleading not guilty to kidnapping and disfiguring the woman with intent to cause grievous bodily harm in March last year. Jonathan Mitchell has this report.
At the High Court of Wellington today, the jury was shown a video interview with the woman in which she said a large chain was used to tie her up. She also described being punched and having her head burned. In the interview, she said she was ready to give up, but managed to escape after several days. The woman became upset and had to take a break while viewing photographic evidence of the severed finger. Call Jonathan Mitchell, Ohau.
It's 5:04. The Wallabies halfback Nick White is dismissing the notion the All Blacks have lost their aura in the wake of the drawn first Bledisloe Cup test. The former Australian winger David Campese has told media that under new coach Ian Foster, the All Blacks are no longer the all-conquering side they once were. But White says the All Blacks still set the standard in world rugby.
They're a very good team and have shown that for a long time, so I don't believe that. Do I have belief in us that we can take it to them? Yeah, but that's not a reflection of them at all. It's a reflection of us and where we're going.
40,000 tickets have already been sold for Sunday's second test at Eden Park, which has a capacity of 47,700 for the match. The ANZ Premiership netball champions, the Central Pulse, have finalised their squad for 2021, confirming the re-signing of shooters Ilea Dunn and Silver Fern Amelia-Ann Ekenasio. It'll be the fourth campaign the pair have combined for, and they'll be joined by the experienced Te Amo Amaru Tibble in the shooting circle. Amaru Tibble last played for the Pulse in 2017. And the Bulgarian boxer Kubrat Pulev says he'll fight champion Anthony Joshua for the world heavyweight title in London in mid-December. Joshua had been due to fight Pulev in June, but the bout was postponed because of COVID-19. That's the news.
An Australian politician reveals a close personal relationship with a colleague facing corruption charges.
I reject any suggestion that I cared about his finances or anybody else's. I'm an independent woman.
The Medical Association backtracks on its legal cannabis stance.
The association was making out all doctors were opposed to recreational cannabis legalisation, which isn't the case.
And could Labor govern alone?
There's a cost to hubris, which it would be read as. So really this would be a really high-risk strategy.
Sex, drugs and closing polls. Morning Report weekdays from 6 on air and online.
Now the short forecast from Met Service to midnight tomorrow. Northland to Waitomo, including Coromandel, Bay of Plenty and Central High Country. Rain with some heavy falls, clearing from the west tonight, cloudy periods tomorrow. Gisborne and Hawke's Bay, rain clearing from the south today, fine tomorrow, but rain from tomorrow night. Taranaki to Wellington, including Wairarapa, long fine spells, scattered rain later tomorrow. For Nelson, Marlborough and Canterbury, fine apart from isolated showers today, scattered rain or scattered showers spreading from the south tomorrow, and snow lowering to 500 metres in Canterbury from the evening. Southland and Otago, partly cloudy, rain developing tonight, turning to showers tomorrow, and snow to 400 metres for a time. Bulla, Westland and Fiordland, showers turning to rain in Fiordland tonight and elsewhere tomorrow morning, then clearing from the south. Chatham Islands, low cloud, occasional rain, turning to a few showers tomorrow afternoon. RNZ National, it's 7 minutes past 5.
Thanks, Susanna, and welcome to Checkpoint. I'm Lisa Owen. National is ramping up its attacks on Labour, with Judith Collins accusing Jacinda Ardern of lying about testing at the border and saying she's happy to prove it in court. The Labour leader has dismissed the accusation as opposition politics and says exactly what happened was well traversed in the debating chamber. But the campaign drama doesn't stop there. Both New Zealand First and ACT have today admitted they're not confident Labour will stick to its word over a wealth tax. Here's our political reporter Katie Scotcher.
Judith Collins, all guns blazing at a public meeting on the Kapiti coast.
Remember the second lockdown. Did you have any COVID-19 here in Otaki? Did you have any? No. Did you have a level 2 lockdown, didn't you? Had you done anything to deserve that one? No. Who let COVID-19 in? I tell you who did. Jacinda Ardern and her government, they let it in. Why?
And it didn't stop there.
She promised us all, and we believed it, foolish us for believing her, that every border-facing staff was being tested for COVID-19 regularly. Last week, we found out actually only 7% of the border-facing staff were being tested. What a lie. And I'll call it out for what it is. And who was put at risk? Everybody of New Zealand. So when she said she went hard and fast, she went slow and pathetic, and actually the other thing she did is she lied to us about what was happening. And I'm happy to say that, on the record, she lied. Gee, I hope she sues me for it.
Jacinda Ardern brushing it off.
What's your response to that?
Opposition politics.
And what about asking for someone to sue her?
Frankly, that's odd.
The National leader continued to pile pressure on Ms Ardern and any potential Labour Greens government, while re-announcing her party's plan to build a link road in Hutt South.
You know that Labour want to have the Greens with them every single moment so they can use them as the excuse for not doing what they've promised to do, that they will stop projects going for roads, they will stop Wellington moving, and they will put in a wealth tax because that's what they want to do.
Labour has repeatedly ruled out introducing any new taxes if re-elected. But New Zealand First leader Winston Peters and ACT's David Seymour aren't sure her party will stick to its word.
As the economic crisis change and circumstances change, then what happens is they use that as an excuse. They use it on the BNZ, they use it with respect to the Asian financial crisis, they've used it with respect to the global financial crisis. Every chance they have, they've used the excuse to break their word. So why would this be different?
Nobody is in a position to rule in or out a particular policy until they've got that agreement for 61 MPs to vote in a particular way.
Green MP Eugenie Sage says a wealth tax is one of her party's top priorities.
What happens after Saturday is up to the voters to determine in terms of if we get a strong party vote Green, we will be in a position to negotiate, but Judith Collins cannot predict the outcome of those negotiations. We will be pushing though for a wealth tax.
Ms Sage unveiled the Greens' plan for the tourism sector in Akaroa today. It wants to crack down on freedom camping, upgrade walking tracks and huts, and review the New Zealand Aotearoa tourism strategy. She then hopped in a kayak herself.
We saw a pied shack struggling to eat a full skate that it had caught. Amazing dramatic sea cliffs because the area was once a volcano, mussel beds and sea caves.
Back in the capital, Labour leader Jacinda Ardern visited Victoria University and was greeted by a sea of students.
Are you able to do a quick selfie on this photo? Sorry guys, it's a really big one.
Ms Ardern was asked if her party has let students down by deciding not to extend its fees-free tertiary program past the first year of study.
It's meant that students haven't had to borrow money for that first year of study, and that's been really crucial. We, of course, did have aspirations for years 2 and 3. Instead, rightly so, in the current climate, we've made the decision to make apprenticeships free.
The Labour Party has also just released its election policy manifesto, wrapping up its plan for the country 4 days out from Election Day. Mō te hōtaka o te ahiahi nei, ko Katie Scott Ahau.
With 4 days to go, New Zealand First Leader Winston Peters is on the final sprint after a marathon tour of the whole country. From Bluff to Northland, the New Zealand First bus has travelled almost 12,000 kilometres in total. Our political reporter Jo Moyer has exclusive access to the campaign in what could be Mr Peters' last. She's on board the bus, travelling with Mr Peters and his contingent from his old stomping ground of Tauranga. Good evening, Jo. Paint us a bit of a picture. What's it like on the inside there on that bus?
Yeah, hi Lisa. So we're just making our way. We're on the motorway now, heading towards Auckland. And yeah, as you said, coming from Tauranga, his old stomping ground, we had a public meeting there. The bus literally drove into the meeting as it was being held in a big sort of airport flyer situation with planes and all sorts of things. So getting on the bus was quite an experience, but basically we've got a bit of a makeshift office going on in here. So Mr Peters has been doing everything from sort of cabinet meetings to strategising to media interviews. We've already pulled over a couple of times today for him to do a few overseas interviews, just trying to get those final votes from people. And, you know, the bus itself is kind of covered in black and white, the party's colours, the Back Your Future campaign slogans, black and white streamers. There's actually a little Winston Peters little model head at the front of the bus as well for people. Lots of toots too. So, yeah, it's an interesting vibe on here. There's not a lot of people on the bus. It's a pretty small contingent. But Winston Peters has been in good form. He's even done a bit of singing on the bus this afternoon.
Oh, any particular tune, Jo?
Well, there's a couple of young candidates who are on the bus, and while we're on the road, they're sort of concentrating on sending emails and phoning people and leaving messages about this public meeting in Kelston tomorrow. And one of the guys was on the answer phone to someone and said, "Oh, hello, Caroline," and Winston Peters just broke out into Sweet Caroline, as you do. So.
Now, just tell us, so that we can picture this in our head and how awkward this is. Is he sitting a wee way away from you? Whereabouts is he on the bus?
No, he's not. He sits in the same seat every time. I actually came on the bus with him in 2017 for a little bit as well, and he's still sitting in the same seat that he did then too, so a bit of a creature of habit. So he's in that seat just to the left of the driver, so he can see everything that's going on. He does sit by himself. It's 2 seats, obviously, but he doesn't have anyone next to him. He is doing quite a bit of work, though, as well, so I guess that's fair enough. But no, I've been sat just across from him, and yeah, there's been a bit of banter and a few jokes. He had his lunch on here, had some sushi, and yeah, it's all pretty relaxed, really.
Yeah, because I'm wondering about the mood. He's polling very low at the moment. In fact, you know, some would say staring down the barrel of political oblivion here. So what's the strategy from this point onwards?
Yeah, I mean, 4 days to go, and we've seen those numbers, right? You know, lots of people have already voted, and I did do a sort of one-on-one interview with him before and talked about that, and he said, look, you know, it's difficult because it's kind of become 14 days of an election day because people are out voting early, but, you know, he says there are still people who haven't decided who will vote on the day, and you know, his argument is that people will realise that, you know, the Labour Green coalition that, you know, polls are suggesting will be, it's a real lurch to the left, and, you know, he's banking on being that handbrake. He's really using that.
Oh, I think we might have just lost Jo. I think the Winston Peters New Zealand First bus. Oh, you're back, Jo. We lost you temporarily. Oh. Hello. You must have just gone around a blind corner or something. So you were talking about him pushing this idea that he's the handbrake. I was interested to see today. He's gone, well, I suppose you'd say quite negative on the campaign. He's raising concerns, isn't he, about whether Labour is committed to its promise of no additional taxes other than the ones it has announced.
Yeah, that's right. So, I mean, he says that Labor's promise not to introduce that wealth tax, that Green Party wealth tax that they've proposed, would evaporate when they had an excuse to, basically. And that excuse, he says, is, a changing economic circumstance. So he's putting it out there that they would break their word, and he says, why would it be any different on this? That's very similar, of course, to the rhetoric that we've been hearing from Judith Collins as well. Now, media did push him on that at the stand-up afterwards there in Tauranga, and he didn't really want to elaborate any further, probably because, the questions were centred around you sound like Judith Collins. But yeah, interesting that, he's the one who's been in coalition with Labor, and, there's been the Greens relationship there with supply and confidence. And, he's basically saying that, you can't trust Jacinda Ardern at her word, despite the fact that he's been Deputy Prime Minister for the last 3 years.
And along the way, Joe, he's also been really pushing that message about abstain from voting until the last minute. What's he thinking there?
Well, he's hoping that enough people will wait and see. Now, the message that he's been giving about that specifically is you're going to see a whole bunch of, political parties drop clangers of policy announcements in the days leading up to the election. And if you've already cast your vote, well, then you're a bit stuffed by then. To be fair, most political parties have got their big policy out now. There's a sort of dribs and drabs coming through, but, that big sort of flagship stuff has kind of been done. Now, I guess you could say that Winston Peters has bucked the trend in that sense, because he's actually kind of left his big policy announcements. There was very few policy announcements in the first sort of 3 weeks of the campaign trail with him, and then we've seen quite a bit in the last few weeks. So I guess he's using that strategy to try and get voters interested and maybe hold off and think, I won't vote just now. I'll see what happens with, the national vote, and see whether New Zealand First may or may not be in play.
So, Joe, can we just ask you, if it's safe on any number of levels, do you think you could just wander down the bus a little bit and get closer to the man himself? Would it be rude to just give him a shout and ask him what the highlight of the campaign has been for him so far, and just give us a bit of commentary as you're walking down? What are you passing in the bus?
So I'm just making my way down the aisle. Now we've got a young guy here who's been on the campaign for the entire trip, actually. He's doing all the social media. He's putting together a video at the moment. Looks quite good. He's nodding at me going, it is. So he's been doing a lot of the ads and their social media videos. Now we've got people still emailing and phoning. The comment was made earlier that not going to leave anything to chance, so they are really just hitting the phones in both respects. Winston Peters is still at the front there. He has got earphones in. He appears to be listening to something, so I'm not sure he's going to play ball if I ask him what his highlight of the campaign
Maybe he's listening to you on RNZ, Joe, so maybe he'll know that you're incoming here. Let's just give him a bit of a wave and see if you can get his attention.
He's been given a tap. I'm not sure if he's going to...
Oh.
Mr. Peters, do you have a highlight of the campaign so far that you'd like to share by any chance?
Oh, we're waiting with bated breath.
Yeah. I'll try again. Do you have a highlight of the campaign by any chance?
So Joe is asking Winston on the bus.
No, he is busy on the phone. He's just
he's
sorry,
busy.
I'm on the phone.
Okay,
So
he's probably, as you say, trying to squeeze out every last vote there, doing a bit of a campaign ring around. So where do you get off the bus if you're not ejected before you get to the end destination after this attempt?
Well, I'll be ringing you, Lisa, if I do get ejected and say, come and pick me up. No, I'm going to see it through until Auckland. Winston Peters is in Auckland for the next 2 days campaigning. So I will be heading to the RNZ office as soon as we get there.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Joe. That is Joe Moir, who is on board the New Zealand First campaign bus. Winston Peters just a little bit busy to talk there. He's on the phone getting every last vote there. They're heading towards Auckland. It is 5:20 and you're with Checkpoint on RNZ National. We're keen for your feedback. Let us know your thoughts on the campaign with just a few days to go. I know so many of you have early voted. You can text us on 2101, tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ, or send us an email. checkpoint@rnz.co.nz is our email address. A mortgage rate war could be on the way as banks look to lend more money to potential home buyers. Heartland Bank has stoked the fire with a record 1-year fixed loan rate of 1.99%. Meanwhile, house prices continue to defy COVID-19, with figures from the Real Estate Institute showing the median house price is now $685,000. Homes are also being bought at a faster rate, meaning the number of new listings is staying low. Our reporter Anand Zaki has more.
It's an enticing time for those looking to buy a house. Heartland Bank's announcement that it will offer a 1.99% mortgage rate is likely to be followed by others, according to Massey Business School Associate Professor Claire Matthews. She says a mortgage rate war is very much on the cards.
I think there's every likelihood that there's going to be a bit of an interest rate war. This tends to be the time of year when the lenders have interest rate wars. We haven't had them seriously the last couple of years.
Claire Matthews says spring tends to be a time when people buy houses, which causes some excitement at banks. She says banks may look to compete, but it will depend on how much funding Heartland Bank has. If the bank has a modest-sized pool of funds, she says other banks may not look to compete.
If Heartland's got a more substantial amount of money, then they may feel that they need to make more of an effort to counter that because there'll be a greater amount of lending that they could potentially lose. The
low mortgage rates are coming at a time of a buoyant housing market, which is defying the impacts of COVID-19. Figures from the Real Estate Institute shows the median house price across the country is now at $685,000, which is up from just under $597,000 a year ago. In Auckland, the median house price has soared 12.6% to $955,000. Kiwi Bank senior economist Jeremy Couchman says prices are rising partly due to the low mortgage rates and the Reserve Bank cutting the official cash rate, which is currently at 0.25%.
They also removed loan-to-value ratio restrictions on new lending, so meaning that certain types of borrowers, such as investors and new home buyers, can get access to credit much more easily. And there's just a significant lack of listed properties at the moment.
Mr. Couchman says there are indications that mortgage rates will continue to fall, with expected drops in the official cash rate next year. He says the Reserve Bank is worried about inflation and employment in its medium-term outlook.
That suggests that if this continues, this outlook remains quite subdued, that they will probably move to ensure that they do meet their mandate. So, we could see further cuts to the cash rate early next year. That's certainly our expectation.
Mr. Couchman says that should help push mortgage rates down further. The Real Estate Institute's Chief Executive, Bindi Norwell, believes the fear of missing out is contributing to the high demand.
People expected it to go down in terms of price and probably held off for some time to wait for that, but it hasn't happened. So now people are thinking, wow, I need to get into the market if it continues to increase because I don't want to be even more expensive as well. So I think we're seeing that increased activity and it's everywhere across the country.
Bindi Norwell says the market is bucking the trend of normal election cycles when it tends to quieten down as prospective buyers wait to see the outcome. She says there won't be a slowdown in the market anytime soon as summer approaches, which is traditionally a busy time for buying and selling property. For Checkpoint, Anand Zaki.
200 jobs were lost each day in Auckland in August, according to council number crunchers. While better than the 250 daily losses expected, it still tallies up to more than 4,000 jobs going during the recent regional lockdown. It's made for a competitive job market. Applications are surging for customer service and admin roles, which have halved since this time last year. Amy Williams reports.
It's a scenario no one could accurately predict. Auckland Council Chief Economist David Norman says COVID-19 has changed the rulebook.
Never in my economics career did I think I'd be using public health advice as a starting point for trying to think of where the economy was heading. Looking at alert levels to try and determine how many people you think are going to have jobs or how strong the economy is going to be. This is not something they teach you in any textbook.
His team has tallied the cost of Auckland's second lockdown on the city's economy, and it's grim. In dollar terms, the lockdown is estimated to have cost the city $40 million each day during the second round of Level 3. Auckland's job losses mounted to 4,205 in August, 60% of the nationwide total.
These are real people, with lives and families to support, and a lot of them lost their jobs, over 4,000. So that's a real impact. But I think what we've been encouraged to see through Wave 2, much like we saw in Wave 1, was that there has been remarkable resilience in the economy. Businesses have bounced back quickly.
But those who have lost their jobs face stiff competition finding work. According to the website TradeMe, the number of applications for customer service and office admin roles have more than doubled, while the number of roles advertised has halved. Its jobs spokesperson Matt Tollidge says Auckland's been hit hardest, with the number of jobs advertised on the site dropping dramatically during the city's second lockdown.
Auckland did take the brunt, obviously experiencing lockdown again. Auckland was down 41% for the quarter. If you look in comparison to April, we were down 72%, and in May, 52%. There was some improvement there.
While each job listing in Auckland attracted 20% more applicants in September, twice the national average.
There's more people on site looking for roles. So we were actually up 11% for the quarter. So, with more jobs starting to come on site, hopefully those people will find the right job for them.
Perhaps some city residents might look to the regions. TradeMe figures show 9 out of 15 regions recorded an increase in job listings. For Checkpoint, Amy Williams.
The New South Wales Premier, Gladys Berejiklian, is digging in following revelations she was in a close personal relationship with disgraced former MP Daryl Maguire. The relationship between the pair was uncovered yesterday when the Premier gave evidence at an anti-corruption inquiry. Mr Maguire is accused of misusing his public office in the pursuit of his own financial interests. The Premier's called it a stuff-up in her personal life, but insists she's done nothing wrong. The ABC's Annie Guest reports.
The New South Wales Premier, Gladys Berejiklian, is full of regrets.
Had I known then what I know now, of course I would have had nothing to do with him, but I did not know the extent of what he was alleged to have done.
But her defence that poor personal judgment explains why she continued a relationship with disgraced Liberal MP Daryl Maguire, even after he was forced to quit Parliament in 2018, doesn't stack up for barrister Geoffrey Watson. Now the director of the Centre for Public Integrity, he's a former counsel assisting for the Independent Commission Against Corruption.
Well, absolutely not, I'm afraid. The fact is that, as best I'm able to tell from the evidence so far, unfortunately the Premier seems to have deliberately tried to turn a blind eye to some problematical statements made by Mr Maguire. I just don't think that you can do that. You cannot brush it aside.
The ICAC is investigating further allegations Daryl Maguire misused his position as an MP to improperly gain a benefit for himself. Gladys Berejiklian says she asked him not to tell her about his business dealings.
Well, for what might have been good personal reasons, the Premier wasn't listening to what seemed to be inappropriate information.
Gladys Berejiklian knew enough to ensure that he left politics in 2018 over the property deal. Given that, was that enough to sever ties?
I just can't imagine, after coming into knowledge of Mr Maguire's activities at an earlier time, that it was the right position for our Premier to take to remain in a relationship with the fellow, which seems to be a matter where he took advantage of the Premier. But that's always going to happen if you're dealing with people with inappropriate motives.
The New South Wales opposition is calling for the Premier's resignation and will move a motion of no confidence against her in Parliament. Dr Mark Rolfe is a political analyst from the University of New South Wales.
Look, I think at this stage, until there's further information from ICAC over the next week or so, we can take her at her word and keep an open mind about it.
What does this say about her, that she continued some sort of relationship supporting him when she knew enough in 2018 to force him out of Parliament?
Bad personal judgment, some bad political judgment as well. Whether it's corruption, I think we'll have to wait and see.
How tenuous do you think her hold on party leadership will be?
If you're asking whether there's going to be civil war within the Liberal Party over this, I don't think so at this stage. They don't want to appear like the Labor Party before 2011 with a revolving door of premiers and the stench of something actually going on.
And for now, senior New South Wales government ministers are publicly showing their support for the Premier to remain in the top job.
Annie Guest reporting. An $11 million Wellington project is just getting underway after a 6-month delay because of lizards. In 2017, heavy rain caused landslips on the Ngaio Gorge road, which has had a temporary fix since then. But now the 2-year project to stabilise and reinforce the slip areas has started, not with spades and hammers, but with a lizard hunter. Caleb Fotheringham reports.
It's been a slow start to get to this point, with COVID just one of the hold-ups. Before work on Ngaio Gorge Road could begin, the Wellington City Council had to wait for the lizards to wake.
So we initially wanted to start this project around March this year, and we were obviously delayed by COVID, and that meant we went into winter, which meant the lizards were hibernating, so we actually had to postpone the project start till now to wait for the lizards to wake up so we could relocate them.
That's the Council's Transport and Infrastructure Manager, Siobhan Proctor, who says the cost for lizard searching has been added to the project budget. When the lizards are found, they are relocated to a neighbouring park, and as the project advances, the hunt for lizards will continue at a new height.
In a year's time, we'll move up to the slip area itself to collect the lizards, and we'll use abseilers to do that, and then hopefully we can relocate as many as possible.
That's the sound of official Ngaio Gorge lizard wrangler and herbologist Chris Wedding as he searches for the camouflage reptiles. He's got a week to look for the lizards before their homes are destroyed by construction.
So I've just been going through, clawing back some of the vegetation myself. I call it systematic destructive searching, so I'm literally just hand pulling debris. There's rubbish in amongst that stuff, but there's good weedy ground covers I can pull back.
Wellington is home to at least 17 types of native lizard. 6 of these, including 3 rare lizards, can be found on site. So far, none have been found, but Chris Wedding is confident if he comes across one, he'll be fast enough to catch it.
Lizards go into a bit of a sleep over winter, and they're coming out of that now. We're in October, it's warming up, so they'll be popping their heads out. On warm days, they'll be basking. So while they are becoming more active at the moment, they're still not incredibly quick, particularly compared to some of the tropical species overseas.
While New Zealand's lizards are a bit more relaxed than their international counterparts, Mr. Wedding says our lizards have unique personalities.
Individual lizards do have different personalities, I must say. You get some that are more bold than others, and I think you find that with lots of animals. But on the whole, I would say lizards are very introverted.
At another Wellington development, at Omaroro Water Reservoir, 27 lizards, some of which are pregnant, have been moved to lizard hotels until work is completed. They've used traps to lure the lizards with their sweet tooth, partial to a pear or nectar. But for now, the search at Ngaio Gorge continues. The road is down to 1 lane for the next 2 years until the project is completed. In Wellington for Checkpoint, Caleb Fotheringham.
And coming up on Checkpoint on RNZ National, South Australia rolls out 100,000 COVID marshals. So what do? Do they have a uniform? Labor and National swoop on 2 battleground seats in Wellington as they sift around for any votes still up for grabs. And we return to Lake Ohau, where residents have been able to see the damage and devastation from last week's fire. Get in touch, share your thoughts on the campaign trail so far. What do you think of the mortgage rates down to 1.99% with one company? And I'd like to hear your ideas for a collective noun for otters. No cheating. Text us on 2101, tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ, or send us an email, checkpoint@rnz.co.nz. Time now for the headlines with Susanna.
Jacinda Ardern is dismissing Judith Collins' claim she lied about COVID-19 border testing. At a public meeting today, the National Party leader said the Labour leader lied in saying as Prime Minister that border security staff were being tested when only 7% were. Ms Ardern is shrugging off the comments as opposition politics. With 4 days to go to the election, the number of advance votes cast has already surpassed the total from 2017. 1.28 million people have voted early. The total for the entire election last time was 1.24 million. More than 4,000 jobs were lost during Auckland's second lockdown. Auckland Council's chief economist David Norman says the city's job losses averaged 200 a day during level 3 in August, which was fewer than forecast but still a high number. The 4,000 1,205 jobs lost were 60% of the national total during the same period. Lake Ohau residents do not know when they'll be able to permanently return to their fire-ravaged properties. 9 days ago, a fire ripped through the village in the Mackenzie district, destroying or damaging half of the properties. The road to the village has reopened and a new cordon set up near the entrance, and crews are working to restore essential services like power. The Porirua City Council will have to borrow $2.6 million to pay back the wage subsidy it wrongly received. Its initial application was approved when it reported a revenue loss of 44% in April, but this didn't include rates revenue. But the Ministry of Social Development today told the council it didn't meet the threshold after clarifying the criteria to include rates. A warehouse employee says there's a feeling of dejection as long-serving staff have their hours slashed. The company expects its restructure to result in between 500 and 750 jobs being cut, while others will have their hours cut back. One employee who spoke to RNZ anonymously says the restructurings are being handled poorly and the company is cutting far too many people. Those are the latest news headlines on RNZ National. Our next news and weather update is at 6.
Thanks, Susanna. Kia ora anō. This is Checkpoint and I'm Lisa Owen. It's time for the business news now with Giles Beckford. Hey, Giles, so houses are hot property. We know that already, but small businesses too? What's going on?
Well, as you would expect, people are actually looking for places to put their capital, and if you've lost a job or you're a returning expat, then you're thinking, where can I actually gain some gainful employment? And from that point of view, people are saying, well, why don't I try and become my own boss or run a small company? And a company called ABC Business Sales, who are sort of one of the bigger actors in this sector, so demand that they've been hearing is up 15 to 20% on this time last year. There's a good deal of competition for businesses of the right type, especially with good cash flow. Among the favoured ones are subscription services, food and beverage wholesalers, not the retailers, compliance and healthcare services, well, no surprises there, home improvement and renovation businesses. So these are where people see there are openings for earnings, prices accordingly, just like the housing market, going up. But clearly people have an appetite to be their own bosses.
Interesting. OK, you've also got an update for us too on the MetLife Care takeover.
Just in the past half hour, there's been something from the company which says it's a last-minute hitch. The takeovers panel, which doesn't normally get too involved in these types of transactions, but it must issue a letter of no objection. And there's been, this of course being one of the more rancorous takeover offers in recent years, there has been an objection. One small shareholder with 1,000 shares and with some investment in MetLife Care bonds has objected to the takeovers panel. Accordingly, the panel has decided that it will not make a decision today as it was expected on whether to issue that letter of no objection. Now, that's one piece of evidence that must go from the panel to the High Court. And the High Court gives the final sanction to the takeover. Remembering this is a $1.3 billion takeover by the Swedish firm EQT. MetLife Care, of course, has been dismissive, or the majority of the board has been dismissive of objections to the takeover from day one. But clearly it's not all plain sailing. They say they still intend to go to the High Court on Thursday to see whether the court will give them the final sign-off on the takeover. It may well be that that doesn't happen, and settlement of this big deal will take just that little bit longer. Interesting that one small person has been able to stand up and perhaps potentially put a spanner in the works. It's not often that we actually see that in the New Zealand corporate scene.
And bring us up to date, Giles. What have the numbers been on the market? Well,
just like the housing market going frothy, then the share market is exactly the same. A fourth consecutive record close, up 97 points today. That's just under 1%, and it's getting close to that 12,500 level. We've had 10 positive closes, 10 higher closes in a row so far. The market is up around 5% so far this month. So pretty good there for share markets. The New Zealand dollar, 66.4 US cents, 92.5 Australian, and just a whisper under 51 British pence.
Thanks, Giles. Giles Beckford joining us from our Wellington studio with business. South Australia's trained up 100,000 dedicated COVID marshals to make sure businesses, restaurants, bars and their customers all follow social distancing and hygiene rules, and in preparation for the return of international tourists, including potentially Kiwis. From Friday, New Zealanders are able to travel to New South Wales and the Northern Territory without quarantine at the Aussie end, but they will have to isolate on return to New Zealand. South Australia is keen to be the next state to open up and has also launched a voucher scheme to help breathe life into its struggling CBDs. South Australian Tourism Commission's marketing man, Brent Hill, sets out to impress us with his COVID marshals in a laid-back sort of Aussie way.
The trained COVID marshals, basically that's an initiative that's been put in place for our hospitality areas. So the primary thing that they do is just ensure that the rules that are in place are being followed. So you have one per venue, and they basically just ensure that things like, people were remaining seated when drinking, for example, when that was a rule, that they weren't dancing and drinking at the same time, just ensuring that the COVID plans are being put in place.
So do they have any powers?
They do, in the sense that, they're obviously not the police or anything in that sort of sense. So it's a gentle reminder to people to just inform them of what's going on. My own experience of it has been really good. The people have just simply said, "Can we just remind you about the rules?" And everyone's respectful of that. And I haven't seen or heard of any issues.
So what's the deal then? Were you standing too close to someone? Do they come around with a ruler or something and say, "Could you please step back, Brent"?
I was having a beer with a friend was holding a beer, having a conversation, and was just gently reminded by the COVID marshal that I needed to find a seat, which was completely fine and obviously something that I was very happy to do, because at least I was able to have a beer.
So is this a state rule? Are these marshals compulsory for every business to have?
It is part of having a COVID plan, yes, yep.
So who pays their wages? How does it work?
So in more often than not, they're part of the organisation already. So, for example, at my local coffee shop, the COVID marshal there was somebody who was already there as a barista. In a pub sort of scenario, it's probably the manager or somebody of that nature.
And I don't mean to be flip when I say this, but we're really curious about it. So do they wear a badge or something? Are they identifiable? Do you know they're the COVID marshal?
Yeah, they do. That's part of the process. So some of them have taken it to the next level, of course, and have a bit of fun with it. And so wearing, beautiful bright coloured vests or a hat or something of that nature. But part of the rules were that you had an identifiable COVID marshal. And I think in some cases people asked them questions and so on. So they wanted to be able to identify them. And so, as I say, in most cases, it's very obvious who they are.
So, obviously they play a serious role, keeping everybody in line and abiding by the rules. But how much of this is about reassuring the public that you've got it under control and say, Kiwis who at some point might be able to come and visit you soon?
Oh, look, exactly. I mean, to be honest, they're a very subtle presence. It's not like, you feel like you're being watched all the time. I mean, if we welcomed our Kiwi friends over here very shortly, which we hope to, and they weren't aware of all of the rules, for example, I'm sure that these guys would just wander over and, politely inform them about things. But generally, my experience has been it's been all positive. There hasn't really been any issues.
We've been faced with a situation here in New Zealand where CBDs are really struggling, right? The central business district, people, because we've had lockdowns and they haven't returned in the same kind of numbers. Are you guys seeing the same problem, and what are you doing to draw people back in?
Yeah, so in the regions it was strong, but in the CBD it's well down. In some cases it was up to 80% down. What we've found as well is that the weekends, traditionally the weekends would be a bit softer in a CBD because of all that business traffic and so on. The weekends are actually now up around sort of the 45 to 50%, but still the weekdays are a little bit softer as that business traffic starts to come in. So we're finding that Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday starting to pick up, but still on a whole, that city vibe as workers come back into the city, that's the really key thing that we're trying to help drive.
And are you incentivising people? What's this voucher system?
We're giving people $100 off an overnight stay, and in the regions, $50 off an overnight stay. So, for example, with the CBD, there's a number of 5-star hotels that are going to be $55 per night, and in some cases you can get a 4-star hotel or a 3-star hotel who's decided to put an offer in, which is as low as around $1 to $10. So what we really wanted to do was we wanted to make it that it was such incredible value that people would just go, oh my gosh, I'm going to do this, right? Because obviously if you live in the state and you live in the city and you're being asked to stay in the city, people go, well, my house is only 20 minutes away. So it has to be something that's an incredible value. And then they think, wow, this is really exciting, I can go and do something.
So who carries the cost of that? Is that the individual businesses?
No, it's actually us, the South Australian Tourism Commission. So we have put together this plan. It will cost around $4 million. But what we saw was that we needed to help the CBD to really recapture that vibe. So we're really confident that what we'll see is people going, I'm going to make a whole weekend of it, and that they'll actually go out on, say, a Thursday night, go and have some drinks with friends, then go and stay over, and then the next day probably take a day off and, go to the art galleries and go to cafes, etc. So it has a real multiplier effect.
So as of Friday, I think it is, Kiwis can come to certain parts of Australia, right? So as of Friday, Kiwis can head over to see, their Australian counterparts have a bit of a trip around, but not to South Australia. Are you feeling a bit peeved about that?
Absolutely devastated. Look, we think from our perspective in South Australia, we are very ready to go. We have had very, very low cases and certainly no community transmission cases for a number of months now. So we are certainly ready to go here in Adelaide. We have direct flights previously from Auckland to Adelaide. So what we're really waiting for is the opportunity where there's freedom of travel both ways. So I think at the moment with that, the fact that when you go back to New Zealand, you still have to go through a quarantine period. We think that the best opportunity is when you can go freely both ways.
Could you pick up your computer and turn around and just show us what we're missing out on? What can you see out there?
I certainly can. This is what Kiwis are going to be wanting to come to South Australia to get their view.
It'll have to be pretty good because it's pretty good here in New Zealand, especially if you're in Auckland, which is the city of sails. Oh, okay.
Yeah, just bear with me a second.
Yeah, no, we will.
If you're a Kiwi, today is about 28, 29 degrees. I think this is pretty much where you could just kick back, grab a glass of wine or a gin, and away you go.
And that was Brent Hill from the South Australian Tourism Commission trying to coax us all over there when we can, in fact, leave the country. Let's head to America now, and the spotlight has been on Amy Coney Barrett today, President Trump's Conservative nominee to replace Ruth Bader Ginsburg on the Supreme Court. Democrats are incensed at a rushed process they call shameful, while Republicans can barely contain their glee at getting the chance to fully tilt the country's highest court in a conservative direction. The BBC's Aleem Maqbul has this report.
If confirmed, Amy Coney Barrett would play a huge role in shaping society for her 7 children and generations of Americans to come. The stakes are that high. The Republican chair of the Senate committee making the decision once promised not to try to confirm a Supreme Court justice in the last year of a presidential term, but he's reneged on that.
This is going to be a long, contentious week. I would just ask one thing of the committee. To the extent possible, let's make it respectful.
Of her condition.
In their opening statements, Democrats focused on what they called extremist views held by Amy Coney Barrett, which they said would threaten the health care provision for millions of Americans and many other aspects of American life.
With this nomination, equal justice under law is at stake. Our voting rights are at stake. Workers' rights are at stake. Consumer rights are at stake. The right to a safe and legal abortion is at stake.
One man is dead set on ensuring Amy Coney Barrett is appointed before the election, heavily tilting the Supreme Court conservative. The gathering he had to announce her nomination just over 2 weeks ago is now thought to have been a coronavirus super spreader event. Controversially, some of those who tested positive there participated in the hearing today.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Welcome, Judge Barrett.
Some Democrats said for health reasons alone the process should have been postponed, but also kept returning to the way in which Amy Coney Barrett would shape policies, something she said would not be her job.
But courts are not designed to solve every problem or right every wrong in our public life. The policy decisions and value judgments of government must be made by the political branches, elected by and accountable to the people.
Her nomination comes after the death of Ruth Bader Ginsburg, the iconic and pioneering progressive justice. Some of those protesting the new nomination feel strongly the American people who've already voted in their millions should be the ones to decide whether the next justice is conservative or liberal. Republicans say the public already recorded their view when they voted for Donald Trump 4 years ago.
And that was the BBC's Alim Makbul reporting there. It is 9 minutes to 6. I'm Lisa Owen and you're with Checkpoint on RNZ National. Keen for your feedback as always. A lot of you getting in touch about the collective noun for otters. You can text us on 2101, tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ or email checkpoint@rnz.co.nz. Stay away from the Google machine though, we want your ideas. The Australian Cardinal George Pell has been welcomed back to the Vatican by the Pope 6 months after his child sexual abuse convictions were overturned. Cardinal Pell used to be the Vatican treasurer before he returned to Australia to face trial. He was convicted, then later acquitted of child sex abuse charges. It's not clear what the Pope and Cardinal Pell discussed today, but the Vatican made no secret of the meeting, releasing the pictures to the world. The ABC's Nick Dole has more.
It's a moment that's likely to please his supporters and concern his critics. 6 months after being released from prison after his child sexual abuse convictions were overturned, Cardinal George Pell met with Pope Francis at the Vatican. The Cardinal attempted to kiss the Pope's ring and the Pontiff pulled his hand away, as is his practice. Instead, the two shook hands and smiled for the cameras. Gerard O'Connell is the Vatican correspondent for America magazine. He says the meeting wasn't a surprise, but the formal nature of it was noteworthy.
It wasn't in the Pope's private apartment. It's where the Pope meets guests in the private library. So it was a little more formal.
And at formal audiences, cameras are invited to capture the images and distribute them to the world.
So the Pope is making a point, in a way. This man stood. He's been acquitted by the highest court in Australia, not by the Vatican. It wasn't the Vatican which acquitted him, the highest court. And he served time in prison. And now, according to the Australian judicial system, he's a free man.
After being convicted and jailed for child sexual abuse in Victoria, the High Court overturned George Pell's convictions in April. He arrived in Rome 2 weeks ago, declaring it was good to be back. He has an apartment near the Vatican and personal business to attend to, but this trip has now resulted in a powerful image of the Cardinal being welcomed back into the fold. Joshua McKelwey is the Vatican correspondent for the National Catholic Reporter.
Well, the Pope's line on the investigation and the eventual conviction and then acquittal of Cardinal Pell has always been that the Pope was going to respect the decision of the Australian judicial authorities. So at this moment, obviously Cardinal Pell is not convicted of anything. He's a free man.
The 79-year-old was head of the Vatican's finances, and he returns as one of his opponents. Cardinal Giovanni Angelo Becciu is embroiled in a corruption saga. But Joshua McKelwey doesn't think Cardinal Pell's stay will be a long one.
I think it's unlikely because Cardinal Pell is 79 years old. He will turn 80 next year. Once a cardinal reaches the age of 80, they can no longer hold church office, essentially. So anything that Cardinal Pell, any office he would be entrusted with, it would be a very short-term assignment. And I don't think that's likely.
And that report by the ABC's Nick Dole. So we asked for your guesses on what a collective of otters is. Here are some of them. A frolic of otters, a fleet of otters, a snag, an exuberance, a splash, a little and a lot of otters. All good suggestions, but no, that's not it. Daniel in Christchurch got it. It's a raft of otters. Daniel, did you look that up on the internet? Text us back, I want to know. And Auckland Zoo has welcomed 5 new otter pups to its resident population. They're collectively dubbed a raft because of the way otters bunch together in the sea. The pups have just had their first weigh-in after being born 4 weeks ago. They're not quite water ready yet because their fur isn't waterproof, but they are looking especially cute, with one keeper describing them as fluffy sausages. Lauren Booth is the team leader of carnivores at Auckland Zoo. She spoke to reporter Nita Blake-Person about the new additions.
Well, we've had 5 lovely little otter pups born into our lovely troop of otters here at the zoo, or I should say raft of otters, which is one of the collective nouns. They're, I suppose, just over a handful, so you might have seen on the pictures on our Facebook page that, to hold one of them, a keeper does use, 2 hands. They're between 300 and 400 grams, so I guess you're looking at a bit smaller than a block of butter is a good, I suppose, comparison. But they're a very kind of light grey, fluffy sausage. So we already have Takumi and Kanan. So Takumi is mum and Kanan is dad. And then they also have 6 siblings from 2 previous litters.
So this is a big otter whānau now.
Yes, yeah, really big. Asian small-clawed otters are actually one of the most social otter species and can be found in families of up to 15 individuals. So we now have a lucky number 13. So yeah, it's going to be pretty busy.
Very. And how do the family dynamics work? Are the other siblings hanging out with their new arrivals, or is everyone separated?
So yeah, with Asian small-clawed otters, everyone chips in. So Dad does a lot of the heavy lifting to begin with. He'll be taking mum food, and of course mum's doing the hard work, actually feeding and raising the young, but Dad's running around looking after the older ones and making sure mum's okay, and he'll also take on babysitting duty. So he does get run a bit ragged. Takumi, our female, is very good at making sure she gets a break. I would say that now for nothing. And then the other older pups, I say older pups, but they're all almost a year old now and or more. And they're all taking turns doing babysitting as well.
And so are the new pups able to do much for themselves, or are they pretty dependent on everyone else?
Oh, completely dependent on everybody else. So mum and dad are still moving them between the different nesting areas, pretty much saying, this one's dirty now, guys, if you could clean that for me. And that's when we pop in and have a clean. And then once it's clean, they move them back. So they have to move them. They're still toileting them. So mum will be doing that after she feeds them. Their eyes aren't open yet. So all they're really doing is being carried around if mum needs to move them to a cleaner spot to give us a chance to get in there and sort things out for her, or eating and sleeping.
Have there been any names suggested for these new guys?
Not yet. We're yet to sex them. So what we'll do is they have vaccinations when they're 9 weeks old and then again at 12 weeks old. So we'll confirm sexes then, just when they're a bit bigger. They're just, easier to sex when they're bigger. And then once we've got those, how many boys and how many girls, we'll be looking into names.
What's the plan for these guys? Will they all stay in Auckland?
So no, they won't be staying in Auckland. 13 is a very, very large group. And so we will be looking at cleaving off a single-sex group for another institution within Australasia.
And that was Auckland Zoo's Lauren Booth speaking to Nita Blake-Person. If you were listening to that, go online and have a look at the pictures of the little otter babies. Other suggestions we got for a collective of otters was a slip of otters, since they're so slinky and slippery, a circus of otters. Love this one, flotilla of otters. That's from our sound engineer, Jeremy. And a playfulness of otters were some of the suggestions. Jilly from Waihiki's got in touch about the COVID marshals in Australia. Says, when I was at boarding school in the 1960s, the headmistress used to measure the distance at the school ball between the male and female dancing couples. You had to go back to the dorm in disgrace if you were too close, says Jilly. Where is she now? Australia needs her.
RNZ News at 6. Ngā mihi nui ko Susana Leata tēnei. Jacinda Ardern is dismissing Judith Collins' claim she lied about COVID-19 border testing. Nationals leader said today that the Labour leader lied in saying border security staff were being tested when only 7% were. Sarah Robson reports.
Ms Collins dared Ms Ardern to sue her for making the accusation of lying, saying she'd be happy to prove it. But Ms Ardern has dismissed the comments as opposition politics. She says the issues were well traversed in the debating chamber and she doesn't need to go through them again. Ms Ardern says the comment about being taken to court is odd. Ms Collins was also scathing of the Labour-led government's response to COVID-19, saying it was slow and pathetic and put people at risk. Ko Sarah Robson, Ohau.
A member of the public booked a room at a managed isolation facility last night and tried to check in. The person walked into the lobby of Auckland's Novotel Airport Hotel after booking a room through a third party. The hotel had cancelled the booking, but the person said they hadn't been told. They were wearing a mask and did not come into contact with any guests or touch any surfaces. Auckland health authorities deem it a low public health risk, but the person's been asked to monitor their health for the next 2 weeks as a precaution, and the incident is being investigated. A warehouse employee says there's a feeling of dejection as long-serving staff have their hours slashed. The company's been undergoing a restructure, expected to result in between 500 and 750 jobs being cut and the hours of other employees being trimmed. One employee who spoke to RNZ on the condition of anonymity says the restructure's being handled poorly and the company is cutting far too many staff. His voice has been disguised.
Dejected, annoyed, disengaged. They've given up to 20 years of their lives to the success of the company. And how do they thank them? By saying, well, you know what, you used to work 40 hours, we're going to give you 5 hours, or we're going to give you 10 hours.
A warehouse employee whose voice has been disguised. The owner of 4 small supermarkets in Christchurch, who charged employees for recruitment-related costs, has been forced to pay them back. James Godinay, who runs Metromart and Zesto, charged 5 workers for the listing of online ads and for filling out forms required for working visas. The Labour Inspectorate says charging employees disadvantages vulnerable migrants and young people and undercuts businesses that are fronting such costs themselves. Mr Godinay accepted he breached employment standards and repaid the 5 employees. The Employment Relations Authority also penalised him $500 for each employee. The Council for Civil Liberties is wary of government's bid for greater access to encrypted data. New Zealand has joined its Five Eyes partners in asking companies like Facebook to share their data in order to curb crime. Thomas Beagle, who chairs the council, agrees encryption is used to cause harm, but he says it also protects personal data, intellectual property and freedom of expression and association.
If one government has access to these systems and to these, the information stored on them, all of them are going to insist on it as part of the price of doing business in that country. So we can't just say we're going to make it available to the good people and not the bad. Once it's available, it's going to be available because those systems will be broken.
Thomas Beagle says governments shouldn't be given more power to spy on people while fascism and authoritarianism are on the rise. The rock fisher who died after falling into the water near Auckland's Bethel Beach has been named. The police have confirmed the body of Lianpeng Liang from Mount Roskill was found on Muriwai Beach. Mr Liang went missing after falling into the water while fishing near Kowhai Island on October the 5th. His death is being referred to the coroner. It's 4 minutes past 6. A hat-trick of supercar championships already secured. New Zealand driver Scott McLaughlin's vowing to leave nothing in reserve at the Bathurst 1000. The Ford driver and defending Bathurst champion wrapped up this year's overall series title last month. Sunday's race may also be the end of an era, given uncertainty about his future in supercars. After Bathurst, McLaughlin heads to the United States for his IndyCar debut in Florida. If he does well there, billionaire motorsport mogul Roger Penske may make his move to the US permanent. The New Zealand squash player Paul Cole has his mojo back. He's won through to the quarterfinals of the Egyptian Open in straight games after disappointingly falling short of the semi-finals of the World Tour finals. Cole says he wasn't feeling like himself last week.
I just had some other stuff going on in my life that's a lot more important than squash, and I wasn't in the headspace to compete against top 10 people, but I went home, reset myself, talked to some people really close to me, and we're ready to rock this week.
Paul Cole. And the Bulgarian boxer Kubrat Pulev says he'll fight champion Anthony Joshua for the world heavyweight title in London in mid-December. Joshua had been due to fight Pulev in June, but the bout was postponed because of COVID-19. Joshua beat Andy Ruiz to regain the WBA, IBF, WBO and IBO heavyweight titles in Saudi Arabia in December. That's the news.
Tonight on Nights, engineer Susan Krumdiek on transitioning from carbon dependency. Where do we start? Who is we? And what are we starting? Then we have a window on the world of white supremacy in Portland, USA. And Trevor Reiki celebrates 200 episodes of Worlds of Music after 11. So we thought we'd have a chat with him after 8. All on Nights with me, Brian Crump, after the news at 7 on RNZ National.
Now the short forecast from Met Service to midnight tomorrow. Northland to Waitomo, including Coromandel, Bay of Plenty and Central High Country. Rain with some heavy falls clearing from the west today, cloudy periods tomorrow. Gisborne and Hawke's Bay, rain clearing from the south today, fine tomorrow, but rain from tomorrow night. Taranaki to Wellington, including Wairarapa, long fine spells, scattered rain later tomorrow. For Nelson, Marlborough and Canterbury, fine apart from isolated showers today, scattered showers or rain spreading from the south tomorrow, and snow lowering to 500 metres in Canterbury from tomorrow night. Southland and Otago, partly cloudy, rain developing this evening, turning to showers tomorrow and snow to 400 metres for a time. Bulla, Westland and Fiordland, showers turning to rain in Fiordland tonight, elsewhere tomorrow morning, then clearing from the south. Chatham Islands, low cloud, occasional rain, turning to a few showers tomorrow afternoon. RNZ National, it's almost 7 minutes past 6.
Thanks, Susanna, and welcome to Checkpoint. I'm Lisa Owen. Lake Ohau residents have begun sifting through the debris of their damaged and destroyed homes in the wake of the devastating fire. The fire razed much of the village earlier this month, destroying or damaging half the properties and spreading across more than 5,500 hectares. Today, the Lake Ohau Road has been reopened to the outskirts of the village, providing more access to nearby properties. Tess Brunton reports from Lake Ohau.
Driving towards Lake Ohau village past tussock, farmland and even lush green trees. Scorched ground and blackened bushes serve as a reminder of the devastating fire. But it's not until you get close to the village that the full, terrible impact is revealed. Residents have been allowed to return to Lake Ohau village to see if they can find anything, any of their possessions among the debris. But as you can see behind me with this burnt out car, some won't be finding very much. It was the first day media were allowed to walk through the village and see the extent of the damage. Corrugated iron roofing is scattered around, burnt out cars with only their metal steering wheel, handbrake and skeletons of seats left behind, and some with only stonework chimneys standing. But other houses have been left untouched, their gardens still flowering, and residents are cleaning ash off the walls with mops. The barn at Killen Bed and Breakfast co-owner Hugh Spears says he doubts any possessions will survive.
It's those wee things, those things that you know you can't go rip down to Harvey Norman's and buy. Your great-great-grandmother's school journal, or your mum's wedding dress, you can't whip down to the bridal frock and get another one of those, or your great-great-granddad's rifle that was sitting on the mantelpiece, or it's just those things. But on reflection of those things, those possessions, those memories, I remind myself that we're awesomely lucky that we have everybody around us.
He's been working through insurance papers before he could return to his property for a managed visit today.
It's all gone. There's nothing. It doesn't even look like there's a complete cup and saucer there or anything like that. And remember, this was a bed and breakfast, and quite a busy bed and breakfast. And we served breakfast, dinner and afternoon teas on fine china and silver teapots. You know, it was quite the high country high tea.
Last week, they managed to find their pet lamb and cat days after they fled the fire.
It must have been so hot. I've got no idea how those wee animals survived. The heat just has melted glass like plastic. Anyway, we've got the gear, we've got the rakes, and we're going to, hopefully, as soon as our insurance has released the property to us, and the guys have come in to just take away some of the structures. There's no structure, but there is quite a lot of iron in the way that we can get into, start having a sort of archaeological dig.
Recovery manager Lachelle Guyon took media on their first walk through of the village.
I don't think you can come here and see this without having a level of emotion. What strikes me every time I come here is how remarkable this community is, that everybody made it out. I mean, I look at this and I cannot imagine what it must have been like for the people that were in here. You can tell that the heat and the force of the fire must have been absolutely ferocious.
Not long after we drove in, the wind started to pick up, rattling the iron. Lachelle Guyon says they want to let the residents back in, but only when it's safe and they have power, water and wastewater back up.
Ohau is well known for high winds. There are large objects that could easily take off and move, and really it's just they could hit people and injure people. There are a number of large structures that you can't see from here, but you will be able to see around the village. Some of those look like nothing's holding them up really. So if you were in a house that's habitable right beside that structure, that wouldn't be safe, so we couldn't open that up.
Waitaki District Mayor Gary Kirchett says so far the plan for the central government's $100,000 is to ease the rates burden for residents. He says fire and emergency scientists have been on the ground trying to work out how the fire developed.
That's going to help not only the rebuild of Lake Ohau village and its surrounding area, but also in a lot of communities right across New Zealand. What are the plants to have? How do you maintain a landscape so that it's not going to spread fire? Some pretty valuable lessons I think are going to come out of this and for the long-term benefit of New Zealand.
While residents have begun to salvage what they can, they still don't know when they'll be allowed to return permanently. In Lake Ohau for Checkpoint, Ko Tasbrunton, Tēnei.
And in news just ahead, emergency services are at a large building fire on Dundas Road, Sanson, in the Wanganui-Manawatu area. Now, motorists are being asked to avoid the area. Diversions are likely. They say traffic will be affected and the roads surrounding Dundas Road are likely to be closed for some time. So just repeating there, emergency services attending a large building fire on Dundas Road, Sanson, in the Wanganui-Manawatu area. Stay away from there if you can. The Labour and National Party leaders hit two hotly contested electorates today as election day looms and the race becomes tighter. Wellington's Ohau and Hutt South are living up to their colourful histories, with the fight for the respective seats heating up. Our reporter Annika Smith has more.
Party leaders were out in force today, making noise in electorates that could swing red or blue. Labour's Greg O'Connor is the current MP for Ohau, a seat previously held by United Future's Peter Dunn. Mr O'Connor won the seat over National's Brett Hudson by a slim 1,000 votes in 2017 and says this election is also a tight race.
It's going to be close, and if I ever thought I was going to win it before the night, then I wouldn't deserve to be there. I'll have to be working for every vote right up to the last minute.
Ohau and neighbouring Hutt South are two of the country's most hotly contested electorates. Wrapping around Wellington Central, there have been close races in the past and this year is no different. For Greg O'Connor, the seat is all or nothing. He's taken himself off the list, so if he misses out on the electorate, he's out of Parliament altogether.
I understand I'm the only MP who's not standing on the list. I actually think that if I don't get selected, I don't think they should have to have me back as a list MP.
National's Brett Hudson is Mr O'Connor's main challenger. He concedes it's a tight race and a swing to Labour may mean the odds are stacked against him. But Mr Hudson says there's strong support for a blue candidate in the region and he's building on that.
With only 4.5 weeks last time, one of the noticeable things was I wasn't able to quite get all the National Party supporters to also back me. I think they've had some time to get to know me, and certainly in this campaign to understand what I've been doing and the things I'd like to achieve for them and for the electorate.
Mr Hudson was excited to host his party leader Judith Collins today, who was in town to re-announce her party's promise to build the Petone to Granada Link Road if elected. With national polling in the low 30s, it's a big if, and Ms Collins isn't taking any chances in her messaging.
2 ticks blue, just in case anyone was under two illusions. People have asked me, what is the strategic vote? The strategic vote is 2 ticks blue. They've also asked, what's the tactical vote? Well, that's also 2 ticks blue. In fact, it's the only vote. It's the only vote that matters is the 2 ticks blue.
Hutt South is also shaping up to be a tight race. Historically, it's been a Labour stronghold, Trevor Mallard holding the seat from 1996 until the 2017 election, when National's Chris Bishop flipped it blue. He's hopeful he'll win it again.
Oh, look, cautiously optimistic. Every election in Hutt South is close. It's a marginal seat for a reason, but I'm proud of my record over the last 3 years and, just hoping that people are going out there and have been voting and continue to vote up until the 17th.
Mr Bishop is trying to drive home the message that he's a good local MP and is determined to hang on to the seat.
There's no plan B for me. I'm just going all out as hard as I can to win Hutt South for National.
Labour's candidate for Hutt South is Ginny Anderson. Queensgate Shopping Centre was abuzz today with Labour leader Jacinda Ardern in town. Ms Anderson says her leader's profile and presence makes a real difference.
It's massive. You could see it today. People are genuinely so pleased to have her and really excited, and it's a pleasure to be able to be her host.
But as for boosting her chances in the seat, Ms Anderson is not so sure.
Look, it's not for me to say. You always hope that by putting in hard work and continuing to talk about the good things that have been delivered in the Hutt under Labour, that will always be in people's minds when they think about voting.
Voters are thinking and voting already. Advance voting numbers have now surpassed the total advance votes cast in 2017. Almost 1.3 million people had cast their votes by this afternoon. And in these 2 close races, every vote will count. For Checkpoint, Annika Smith.
It's almost 17 minutes past 6 and you're with Checkpoint on RNZ National. Oranga Tamariki staff in Kaitaia were forced to work from home today following verbal abuse and intimidation by a group of protesters. Yesterday, the doors of the office were barricaded shut by a protester from United Families for Justice, a network of aggrieved families who want the government agency shut down. Mariana Johnson has more.
The national spokesperson for United Families for Justice, Steve Evans, was unapologetic to the Oranga Tamariki staff.
If they feel uncomfortable, maybe they should have considered their behaviour, or they should have considered joining such a corrupt, lawless organisation.
So you don't have any reservations, or you don't want to apologise or feel bad for those staff?
No empathy. Zero.
Reti Netana Ohau Wellington has been camping outside the Oranga Tamariki office in Kaitaia for 6 weeks now. He says he locked one of their gates because staff were provoking protesters. He then barricaded a door with staff members still inside.
They've come out their side door and they've provoked us again, here I go again. I'm worried about my rangatahi that are here that may react. So I've actually closed down that door and I've made it so it can't be opened either. This is all done by way of safety, so that they can't actually give any, provocation.
Oranga Tamariki Te Tai Tokoro Regional Manager, Rena Hona, says her staff were verbally abused. In a statement, she says all 17 Oranga Tamariki staff members in Kaitaia are working from home because of concerns for their safety. She says police are assisting with the situation and protesters have agreed to move from the site this afternoon. Ms Hona says while groups have the right to protest, she asks that they do it respectfully. Oranga Tamariki has been under fire over the past year, with 5 damning reports revealing failings with the way the agency removes children from their families, particularly Tamariki Māori. One of those leading the movement to stop the state removing Tamariki Māori from their whānau is Laura O'Connell Rapera, who helped coordinate the Hands Off Our Tamariki march in July last year. She says the action taken by protesters in Kaitaia was an expression of their pain.
I think that there is a lot of frustration from people in the community about government inaction around calls that Te Ao Māori have been making since I was born, since the 80s, and those calls are for the government to stop taking Māori children from their whakapapa context of whānau, hapu and iwi, And I think when you've been ignored for such a long time, anger and frustration comes out in a lot of different ways.
Laura O'Connell-Rapira says she doesn't condone staff being made to feel unsafe. Mo te hōtaka o te ahiahi, ko Miriana Johnson DNA.
Civil liberties groups believe privacy, freedom of expression and trade secrets could be eroded if tech companies give up their encrypted data to governments. The government and its Five Eyes security partners are calling on companies like Facebook to release data when requested in order to curb online crime. Eva Corlett reports.
Minister for Justice Andrew Little says while encryption plays an important role in protecting personal data, it's also used to hide illicit material, such as child pornography or terror communication. Mr Little, who's also in charge of spy agencies, says instances of child sexual abuse and exploitation online are growing rapidly. To curb this, the government wants to cooperate with tech companies, and that would include requests for information being on a warranted basis.
Governments to demonstrate there's a reasonable cause to suspect that there's been a criminal offending. So the control is still left in the hands of the platform owners, but it gives enforcement authorities the ability to chase up and investigate some of the most heinous criminal offending we've ever seen.
But the chair of the Council of Civil Liberties, Thomas Beagle, pans the government's plea for more access as contradictory and dangerous.
It talks about valuing encryption and all the things we get from encryption, about secure information, about having to have private conversations, about being able to do things free from repressive governments. And then it also talks about how they need to actually stop all that because they need to access it to stop crime.
Mr Beagle says even if a New Zealand government handled the information carefully, that doesn't mean other countries will.
If one government has access to these systems and to these the information stored on them, all of them are going to insist on it as part of the price of doing business in that country. So we can't just say we're going to make it available to the good people and not the bad. Once it's available, it's going to be available because those systems will be broken.
He says more surveillance has a chilling effect on freedom of expression and association.
Our government already has extensive powers of surveillance using other means, and I don't believe that this will actually be the silver bullet that will suddenly stop all this crime happening. And so I just don't find that a credible claim.
Privacy Commissioner John Edwards says agencies can already be required to hand over information if there is a lawful warrant.
Governments are quite right to be concerned about the use of platforms for exploitation of children. The difficulty, though, is in how you provide that access in a way that does not break the security for legitimate purposes.
Mr Edwards says requirements for companies to release information will be applied in all countries, including oppressive ones. He says an international set of guidelines could be established to set out how information is gathered, but that's not watertight.
Even then, you don't solve the technical challenge of allowing access for legitimate purposes while maintaining a secure network. And people in the tech industry tell me that is impossible.
Cultural advisor and advocate for digital Māori rights, Karaitiana Tauru, says that shutting down harmful behaviour on platforms like Facebook could actually help Māori who face online racism, abuse and scams. But only if Māori voices are at the table helping set the terms.
We've got several hundred years of mistrust with the government. The Tohunga Suppression Act, the Native Schools Act, Uruwera raids. The primary issues with all of those significant pieces of legislation that did impact Māori was that there was no consultation with Māori or with the appropriate individuals and organisations.
Mr Tauru says the more pressing concern for surveillance of Māori is facial recognition technology. Mō te hōtaka o te ahiahi nei, ko Eva Corlett tēnei.
Britain's Prime Minister Boris Johnson has announced a coronavirus response plan for England with a 3-tier lockdown system. The new measures come after data showed as many as 22,000 Britons a day are showing symptoms of the disease. This is a country that's already suffered more than 40,000 casualties, and the number of deaths are climbing once more. The BBC's Laura Koonsberg has this report, which begins with Mr Johnson.
The number of cases has gone up 4 times in 4 weeks, and it's once again spreading among the elderly and vulnerable. These figures are flashing at us like dashboard warnings in a passenger jet, and we must act now. We are today simplifying, standardising and in some places toughening local rules in England by introducing 3 levels of COVID alert.
Only the 1.5 million or so people in the Liverpool city region will be in the toughest category. But in England, more than 4 million people face extra limits from this week.
No one wants to impose these kinds of, least of all me, wants to impose these kinds of restrictions, erosions of our personal liberty. But I'm as convinced as I've ever been that the British people have the resolve to beat this virus and that together we will do just that.
So Liverpool's pubs will be shut by the time it's Sarah's actual birthday later this week. The Mottershead's wedding business hasn't had a job for 6 months, so she's taking on extra shifts as a nurse. But like many, they're worried about paying the bills and protecting their family too.
I worry about my kids as well, not being able to socialise and go out and see their family and friends. So yeah, it has a huge impact.
Where businesses are forced to close, the Treasury will pay some of the wages, but only 2/3 from the start of next month. Rebecca owns the bar and worries it's not enough.
A lot of our staff, they only do 17 hours a week, so if they're only going to be getting paid 63% of that, they're not going to be able to afford to live.
Let's go to the media.
But as cases rise, could we be stuck in a painful holding pattern?
Prime Minister, you've said many times you want to avoid another national lockdown, but it seems every week you introduce extra rules and cases still rise. Are you just delaying the inevitable?
I really hope that we won't have to go back into anything like a national lockdown of the kind that we did in March and April. We could go for a national lockdown again. I think many people would think that was extreme and it would do a great deal of extra harm to our economy.
Professor Whitty, are you confident what's being announced now is really enough to slow the spread of the disease?
I am not confident, and nor is anybody confident, that the Tier 3 proposals for the highest rates, if we did the absolute base case and nothing more, would be enough to get on top of it. And that is why there's a lot of flexibility.
Not exactly a ringing endorsement. And Westminster wants local leaders to make some of the toughest calls. Here in the West Midlands, many are unhappy about how the government made its decisions. The Tory leader, cross that mixing with other households has been limited here.
I think it is very disappointing. It's, my view, not the right decision, both for the health and indeed the livelihoods of citizens across the West Midlands. And quite simply, there's very, very little evidence that locations like this pass on the disease.
Rules vary still in Wales and Northern Ireland, but Scotland's already closed many pubs.
We will be looking to align as closely as possible with the other UK nations. I think it is important and it makes sense to try to do that.
Labour does back the approach, but not how the job's being done.
I'm now deeply sceptical that the government has actually got a plan to get control of this virus, but it increasingly feels like the Prime Minister is several steps behind the curve.
The threat from this pandemic is sadly familiar, but the political climate's so different. Rather than step confidently forward, this place feels riven with doubt.
Laura Koonsberg reporting there. When the Israeli actress Gal Gadot, known for her star turn as Wonder Woman, announced she would star as Cleopatra in an up-and-coming film, many across social media were quick to express their outrage. They were furious the star had been cast as the famous Queen instead of a North African actress. But as the BBC's Charlotte Gallagher explains, the truth of Cleopatra's heritage is rather different.
On your knees. You dare ask the proconsul of Rome?
I asked it of Julius Caesar. I demand it of you.
Elizabeth Taylor starring as Cleopatra in the 1963 film. Now, almost 60 years later, Hollywood has decided it's time for a big-budget remake. The film, which is still in its early stages of pre-production, will see Gal Gadot reunite with the director of Wonder Woman, Patty Jenkins. Gadot made the announcement on Sunday, saying Cleopatra's life was a story she had wanted to tell for a very long time. But almost immediately, social media erupted with complaints over the casting of Godot. Many users were angry that an Israeli actress was to play the title role, not a North African. There were accusations of whitewashing when white actors are cast in non-white roles. However, despite being an Egyptian queen, Cleopatra didn't have Egyptian ancestry. She was descended from one of Alexander the Great's generals, so had Greek Macedonian heritage. Historians also believe she may have had some Iranian ancestry. But as with all social media rows, the arguments are still continuing online.
Charlotte Gallagher with that report. Now, some housekeeping. I'm reliably informed it's Tuesday. Momentarily, I thought it was Wednesday. So that means 4 sleeps to go until the election. And just a reminder, we'll be here election night with a checkpoint election special from 6:55. Not that we're counting down the days. Anyway, in the meantime, you can check out all our stories online, particularly the Otter one. Back tomorrow.
RNZ News headlines at 6:30. A member of the public did not come into contact with any guests when they tried to check in for a hotel booking at an Auckland managed isolation facility last night. More than 4,000 jobs were lost in 1 month during Auckland's second lockdown in August. Motorists travelling through the Manawatu town of Sanson on State Highways 1 and 3 are being warned to expect delays due to a large building fire. The Porirua City Council needs to borrow $2.6 million to pay back the wage subsidy it wrongly received. Those are the headlines. Our next news and weather is at 7.
Take the pulse of the day's news every weeknight at 10.
So it is a global phenomenon that we're moving away everywhere from just voting on the one day to voting in advance.
Lately is your late night eye on the latest headlines and the people who are making them.
And if you catch the Matters at night, he looks embarrassed anyway.